So I'm actually going to start doing, I think I'm going to go a little bit different route than what I had originally planned. And I'm going to do a few topics. I think the next two classes, this one, the next meeting, you guys will find very interesting. So it's I think that there are questions that I've had, I guess, that were really prevalent in the beginning. But yeah, for this one, I'm going to go over is the creation account scientific. So if I've studied over any topic, probably the most has been over what I talked about in the beginning of my last meeting, which was kind of going into does God even exist? And some of the things that I will be re-mentioning again in the beginning, but I think for the most part, a lot of this is going to be brand new. So it's not going to be kind of like the same as last time that I did from the first time that I gave the meeting. So I spent a lot of time researching. At first, I didn't think that the creation account was scientific. I thought that maybe there was a lot more to it, which now I do think that there's still a lot more to it. But you can, the way that the creation account comes in, you can, how should I say, it is, you can find scientific meaning in it. And one of the books that I had read that helped me a lot through this was right here. It's by Dr. Hugh Ross. It's called The Creator and the Cosmos. And Dr. Hugh Ross, he's a cosmologist and astrophysicist. And he has a lot of really good information. So a lot of this that I'll have, this is going to be most of the thing that I'm going to talk about right now is through his book. And this is where I get a lot of the information from. And but I will be bringing in an additional view at the end of it. So we will be going over two things today, and then at the end I'll mention the other meeting. So yeah, we can get right into it. I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen. Just give me a second. All right, and you guys should all be able to see that. All right. So is the creation account scientific? Like I mentioned before, I didn't think the creation account was scientific. I think that there was a little bit of, there were some issues with the way that the days were kind of phrased. I thought that, you know, maybe it was a little bit made up. But the more that you kind of like look into it, you think, well, wow, they actually really did get it right. So we're going to be going through each of the days in this creation account. So with the scientific review of all the days of creation, we're going to start with the first verse. So we're going to go verse by verse of all the days. So we have the right before the first day, it was actually going to be in the beginning. So you have in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So this is Genesis 1, 1, and 2. And so with Genesis 1, 1, and 2, we can already prove that there was a beginning of time and space and matter according to general relativity that was proposed by Albert Einstein in 1915. And some of this is I had mentioned in my first meeting, which was does God exist? So like with the general relativity, one of the most accurate theories it's one of the most accurate theories that has ever been calculated. And it can yield answers to different physical situations such as planetary dynamics, the birth and death of stars, black holes, and the development of the universe. And why is that so important is because we know that all these laws of physics have held true for millions and billions of years. And so here, since we know that there must have been a beginning to the universe, there must have been a creator that exists beyond time, space, and matter to create the universe out of nothing. So this is proven with how we said the very first verse of the Bible. So in the beginning, time, which is time, God created the heavens, which is space, and the earth, which is matter. And in order for God to create, he must have existed outside of the natural realms of the universe to create it. So as time passes through the development of the universe, we're going to get to the very first day. So we have day one. So day one, God, he begins his first day by proclaiming, let there be light. And that's in Genesis 1 verse 3. And as we see the very first, as we see in the very first verse of Genesis 1, our vantage point is seeing what is happening throughout the universe. So I can go back to right here. Oops, I'm going to go back. So we have what the vantage point that's throughout the whole universe. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is a vantage point throughout the universe. Then in the second verse, which is right here, our vantage point, it changes to the surface of the earth. It says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the space of the face of the waters. So that is the vantage point as seen from the earth. So our vantage point changes. As God says, let there be light, opaque, dark clouds and dense gases on the face of the earth would become translucent, only allowing some visible light, allowing for the beginning of photosynthesis. So it allows photosynthesis to begin. And remember, the sun was already made along with verse 1. So along with the rest of the universe. So here we are able to see some light visibility on the second day. Oh, I'm sorry. On the second day, we have God. This will be verse 7. God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. This one I've seen really hard to interpret by a lot of people. This one, when I first read it, I was like, I don't even know what the heck that even means. But when you really look at the wording of it, like the firmament, it just means that it's just talking about the heavens or the sky. And some people I have heard suggest that the firmament was a thick layer of ice that encased the whole earth. So it was just like a ball of ice around the whole earth, and God just separated it. And I really don't think that it was that complicated. So what I just think that is just happening here is the hydrological cycle. So the hydrological cycle, in other words, can be also called the water cycle. So this would set up the hydrological cycle, which is necessary for all of life. And this is done by heating the water. At the beginning, it would heat the water and then it would evaporate into the clouds. And when you would evaporate to the clouds, that would form, I guess, what you call the sky. So that's why it was called. That's why it was called the firmament. I guess was mentioned in verse number 7. So that's when all the clouds formed, and you could see how the sky was, I guess, kind of formed. So you can see how the water cycle it basically works. It just goes from evaporation and transpiration from plants, goes to condensation down to precipitation, then it goes off to the surface runoff and groundwater. So it's just a cycle that happens, and that's all that it's doing in verse 7. So now we can go on to the third day. So the third day says the earth and the sea and vegetation, it takes form. So God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit trees that yield fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. So this is Genesis 1 verse 9 and 11. So on this day, we have huge seismic and volcanic activity occurring. And this caused the creation of the continents and the landmass proportion of 30%, which is ideal for life. I remember the ideal conditions for life would be 30% land and 70% water. And this is what's necessary for any life on any type of planet. Um, in combination of light, water, and large amounts of carbon dioxide, this would have set the stage for plant life. And this is the first time in history that we see eukaryotic cells, which are cells with a nucleus, and those appear, and also angiosperm plants appear, which are just flowering plants. So here on the fourth day, this is where I've seen a lot of people have problems too. And this is kind of where I had problems too. So on the fourth day, the sun, moon, and stars, they become visible. So then it says, then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also. And so this is verse 16. So on day 4, plants are now able to give off oxygen. So and the atmosphere becomes transparent, and transparent it just means it just becomes clearer than how it's been before. It becomes completely transparent to where the sun, moon, and stars become visible on the face of the earth. And a lot of people think that this day it poses a problem where in the creation day account, and we'll say like how could have a vegetation have occurred on day 3 when the sun was created on day 4? Because obviously plants need sun to grow. So the heat. So one way to explain is the Hebrew word for made on day 4 is asa, and which usually means to produce or manufacture, but in this case it could also have meant made appear. So remember that the sun was already made in the beginning, so we are only just seeing the vantage point of what's happening on earth. So all that is doing is just, as the plants are giving off all this oxygen and the atmosphere becomes transparent, all that's being made is just the sun, moon, and stars are just appearing. They're just being visible from our vantage point on earth. So I don't think that it actually means that God, he physically just created it. I think that he had already created it. It was just becoming visible at that time from the vantage point on earth. So now we can go on to the 5th day. So the 5th day, then God said, let the waters abound with an abundance of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the face of the firmament of the heavens. So this is verse 20. And at this stage in history, scientists, they are baffled to what's known as the Cambrian Explosion. And the Cambrian Explosion, for nearly 4 billion years, the Earth was molded into this perfect habitable planet in preparation for this diverse amount of life to take place. So the between 570 and 530 million years ago, what's known as the Cambrian Explosion, it occurs going from single-celled organisms to intricate and complex forms of life that appeared in such a short amount of time. And when this had happened, scientists, they have no idea how, they have no explanation of how this even happened to begin with, how this came, so fast, all this explosion of life. But the Bible still mentions it and still gets it right. And the Bible clearly states how, and in the exact order, and the creation of sea creatures followed by birds. So the Bible even technically gets it in the correct order, how it appeared. So last, on the 6th day, we have land animals and humans, they inhabit the earth. And it says, and God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. God created man in his own image, and in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So this is verses 25 and 27. So God creates he creates land animals and man, both male and female. So here is a picture of Earth's process, which is that I have right here. So here's a picture of Earth's process, which is exactly how it is mentioned in the Bible. The only thing that people will argue about how this even happened, which goes from, the structure of the whole earth all the way to when land appears, and then you have the first type of animals appearing, all the way to what we have now with the land animals, and then we have humans right over here. So the only thing that people will um, argue about, um, I wouldn't say like, well, yeah, so I guess that they would say they would argue or debate. I should say debate. I guess what people would debate about is how long ago did it actually happen? Did God create it all in 6 days, taking it literally in 6 days, or 6,000 years? Or did it really take 13.8 billion years, like many scientists talk about? So, like I said, some literally take it as a six. I'm sorry, did you have a question, Gary?
Yeah. So during all this, is there any kind of scientific explanation of what the concept of time was? Because we only can process time as one day of 24 hours.
Right.
Is that the same construct that this was occurring? So do we like know that, or do we are just, or
Like,
science is just kind of guesstimating?
do you mean like scientifically and physically, or do you mean
Yeah, like how it does it is it matching up? So like our construct of time being one day, because like day one, God created the heavens and the okay, is that in 24 hours? Or is that a longer period, but we're just not able to conceptualize that because we're only accustomed to one day being 24 hours?
right, right? I think I kind of get your question. I will be going over that in this next part,
Oh,
and
okay.
what I think that you are talking about is how it's relating to biblically how the Bible is talking about it. But if you're saying, how do scientists know that all this time has passed since the beginning of the universe, like 13.8 billion years, has time always stayed the same throughout the whole creation of the universe? And with that, um, the way that like I mentioned that a little bit in my very first meeting. I don't know if you were in it, or maybe I don't know if anybody would remember it, but there are ways to measure the very far reaches of the universe, and there's several different ways, which one of them is to like measure the distance of stars, which is called redshifting. And when stars are redshifted, it just means that you're looking at stars um, really far away from us, through I guess through a really high powered magnification telescope, and they'll be like different colors. They'll either be like a degree of red or a degree of blue, and the degree of red means that they're traveling farther away from us. The harshness of that redness is going to be how fast that it's traveling away from us and how far it's away from us. So if it's blue, it just means that the stars are traveling towards us. So that degree of redness it can be measured. And I know that there's like explanations and equations on how to do it, but I'm not a astrophysicist. I've looked a little bit into it, but you can measure how long that's been, and that also attributes to how long physics has been it's been true, I guess you could say. Another thing that I also have written down over here. Oh, there would also be the background radiation, and the background radiation is the radiation measured by the Kobe explorer, and the Kobe is the cosmic background explorer, which measured all the background radiation of the entire universe. So that was in 1989. So in 1989 is when they launched that satellite. In 1992 is when it brought back all that data. And the spacecraft, it kind of like discovered the edges of the universe and all this background radiation. I know that Dr. Hugh Ross mentions that in his book of how accurate that they were able to measure it, but it was something that was like a millionth of a second down to, or something like that. So they can measure it to even before, like right when the singularity happened of the Big Bang. So right before the Big Bang occurred, there was a singularity. So at the singularity is when everything was like tightly bound all together and had so much friction and heat until it couldn't take it anymore. And then the Big Bang occurred. So that's how far that they can measure it with this background radiation. So this background radiation is kind of like an example would be like when you turn on the oven. You turn on the oven and you open the oven door, you can feel all that heat come towards you, and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter the more heat that comes towards you. So that's kind of what it's measuring with all that, is all that heat that's dissipating out into the universe. And they can measure how fast it's going, how long it's been, and they can measure all these sorts of things, and that's all the way to the very beginning. And even throughout that, they can also measure all the elements that are out there. When you see all these gas clouds, it has different types of elements that were there. It has like helium and nitrogen and just all these types of different elements. So the so I guess all this, the scientists are kind of like bringing everything all together. So they're getting all together, time, matter, space, all that stuff, and they kind of figure it all out with with just doing like equations and stuff like that. And you can see that physics has it was accurate all the way even since the beginning. I guess the only thing that you couldn't measure was before the singularity. Um, so I guess that's where scientists would kind of have a debate against of what happened even before the singularity. Sometimes some scientists will say that time worked backwards, or that it went to another universe and it was a multi-universe. We just have the explanation of God. Um, but yeah, I guess with that you can see all the physics that has worked out, you know, very intricately, very precisely, and we use a lot of those that they use to measure all those stars and planets and gases and all that time space travel and all that stuff. We use some of those things in today's physics to figure out how the Earth and how the world and our solar system works around us. So physics has not changed since then. But as for the Bible, we do have different ways on how to interpret, and people will have different ways on how to interpret, which is whether it's 6 literal days, 6,000 years, which a lot of people will use 2 Peter 3:8, which says that to the Lord 1 day is like 1,000 years. So that's why a lot of people will say 6,000 years. Um, but I myself, I use science to show that the universe took 13.8 billion years. I think there's a lot of evidence to point it that way. But instead of kind of going over a bunch of science equations and all that stuff and bore you guys, I am actually going to use the Bible to even prove that. So there is even though there's a lot of scientific evidence of the age of the universe, there are passages in scripture that could suggest that the word day could have been more than our typical day. So the Hebrew word day, which is yom, it's a Y-O-M. I missed that slide. Oh no, I'm good. So the Hebrew word day, which is yom, so this is yom right here, could have 4 different meanings. It could mean part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, or a finite period of time. So for example, creation day 1, it talks about the contrast between day and night. So that is the daylight hours. Creation, day 4. Hold on one second. So creation, day 4. Oh, I just lost my place. Yep, it talks about the seasons, days, and years. So in creation, day 4 is talking about a 24-hour period when it mentions season, days, and years. So it's talking about how we look at time. Genesis 2:4, chapter 2, verse 4, it uses day to refer to all of creation history. So it's talking about a long period of time. Also, all 6 creation days end in evening and morning, except for creation day 7. Day 7 does not end in evening and morning. So, what is so important about the evening and morning? When the verse on each day ends in evening and morning, it kind of signifies that that day had ended. God was done with that day, and then a whole new day began. So, I think that this might be that the reason why day 7 doesn't have evening and morning. I think that this is because we are still in the 7th day of creation. This would explain why we have all of this speciation before humanity, but nothing comes after God created man. Scriptures to support this would be Psalms 95:11 and Hebrews 4. I don't know if I had that written down somewhere. No, I don't have that written down. Oh yeah, I do. I do have it written down right here. So if you guys want to just look that up, if you go or you want to write it down and look it up, I have it right here. So in God's 7th day creation, I have Psalms 95:11 and Hebrews 4. So this could indicate that we are still in God's 7th day of creation. Another passage we can see is that God creates both male and female on the 6th day. After God created Adam, he watched the trees grow in the garden and God had planted. Then he tends to the garden, and he also names all the animals. And then God creates Eve. So when God created Eve, one of the phrases that Adam says is Hapa'am. So Hapa'am I have written right here. So he says in Hebrew, Hapa'am, meaning at long last, which indicates that Adam waited a long period of time before Eve came. So these passages can show that the creation days could have lasted a very long time. So I guess that would be my case for using the Bible on the significance for or the interpretation of each word of day. So as for the creation account, there's no culture on Earth that understood the events of development of the universe at that time. Naming all the days, all the events in order correctly, the odds of randomly guessing the steps in sequence are 1 in 4 million. So, no other religion or anything like that at that time could have guessed how this could have happened. So I know that the Bible isn't a scientific book. A lot of people will use it and say, kind of use gotcha moments because it's not specifically in there a certain way, or it doesn't say something. I heard one person say, I'm not going to believe it unless it has a science equation in it. But it's like, that's not who the Bible was geared for. They had to have put it in a way that people would understand back then, a long time, thousands of years ago. So I know that the Bible's not a scientific book. But I think that it gets it right. Not only does it get it right, it gets it exactly right. It gets it precisely right how it would have happened, even with the corroboration of scientific proof and evidence. So the other bonus part that I'm going to be going into, or before I go into the bonus part, do you guys have any questions that we've talked about so far? If not, I'll go on to the next part. So the next part is how else can we look at creation? The creation account also had, like I said, had to have been structured in a way that people back then would understand it. And when you look at the Bible, even the whole Bible in general, it's It's a way to look at God, I guess, to for us to have a relationship with God is how I should say. And one way to use it is, just the stories that is used is to show how we can have that close relationship with God. And we can use also the very first chapter to show that that was the first thing that God wanted us to understand, especially at it to a culture and a civilization back then. So this next part, I'm actually going to be bringing in to what I've been actually listening to and studying, which has been really opening my mind right now. And it's also going to be what I'm kind of going to be bringing my next meeting into too. So one thing that I've been listening to is a podcast called the Bema Discipleship podcast. So it's given by a pastor who studied under rabbis, and his way of explaining the Bible is explaining it in the context of who it was written to, which were the Jewish nation, or to the Israelites, and when the Bible was written in the beginning. So he kind of explains, our differences between a Western mindset and a Eastern mindset, and that's who it was originally written for. So he's like, the whole time just trying to help us understand where our differences in culturally um, is separated, and just trying to get us to understand more about about the Bible, who the Bible was written to. So one of the things that he talks about are patterns, and with patterns, he talks about specifically chiasms, and I'll put this up on the next slide. So a chiasm right here are patterns that you can actually see and find in the Bible. And they're written all over in the Bible. And his way of explaining chiasms, it's so amazing and mind-blowing. So a chiasm or a chiasmus, it's a particular literary tool that Easterners use. So Westerners like us, we like to make a point by providing logic and reasoning, kind of like a lot of the ways like I do. But Easterners, they believe that true learning comes from discovery. So when an Easterner writes a story, there is something that is placed within the story that the author wants you to discover. It's not going to be obvious, but it's going to be buried in the story so that they can lead you through the process of discovery. One of these processes is by mirroring the first part of the story with the last part of the story. And it can be mirrored in two different ways. So I have it written right here. So it can be mirrored by ABCD, and then going backwards, DCBA, or it can be mirrored by ABCD and then going again ABCD. And this might be a little bit confusing. It was really confusing to me to begin with, but I will be giving an example of with what we've been talking about on how that's laid out. So we can go with the first one. So we can look at creation. The whole first chapter is a chiasm. So the way that we'll look at Genesis 1, it can be both of those chiasms. So a mirrored, which is a forward and backwards, or forwards and forwards. For example, the who I will be referencing a lot in this bit. His name is Marty Solomon, and he's the one that I've got this whole bit from how he's explained it. So Marty, he explains it this way: that a literary structure is the literary structure is in creation day one is you can say that creation day one is a baby paragraph, creation day two is a mommy paragraph, and creation day three is a daddy paragraph. So, it gets smaller and bigger and bigger. And then after day three, it's followed by another daddy paragraph. Then creation day five is a mommy paragraph, so it gets smaller. And day six, it would be a baby paragraph if it weren't for the creation of man. So that's how it would be. So when with the creation of man, the creation of man kind of just like sticks out. It sticks out like a sore thumb, like it shouldn't be there, but it is there, and that's something that we will get into a little bit later. of why they wanted it to stick out so much. So right here, I have the structure on how it would be. So you have the structure, which would be day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6. So it kind of goes forward and then backwards. So then we also have the second way. The content of creation also follows the other chiasm, which would be day 1 corresponds to day 4, day 2 corresponds to day 5, and day 3 corresponds to day 6. So you have all the first 3 days, which are separations. Then you have the next 3 days, which are fillings. So God separated on the first 3 days, and the last 3 days He filled. And each day that I had mentioned with day 1 and day 4, they both they correspond with each other. Day 2 and day 5, they correspond with each other. Day 3 and day 6, they correspond with each other. So it'll kind of be the same of that separation. He fills it with what was separated. So and this is how I have structured out. So it would this is how you would see it structured out right there with the days. So why is this important? It's important because the middle of each chiasm is where the treasure, I guess you could say that, where the treasure that the author they want you to discover that treasure is right in the middle of that chiasm. So the middle of the creation chiasm is the middle of the 4th day, which I have right here. So the middle of the 4th day, it references seasons. So in the NIV, it also says it as a sacred time. So the NIV translates it as sacred time, which in Hebrew it says Moad. In Hebrew, it's pronounced Moad. So Moad is one of 4 ways used to translate the Sabbath. And so why is this so important? Why is this the thing that's singled out of everything? You think that it'd be something totally mind-blowing, or it would be a single word, but it's just Sabbath. Well, to the Sabbath, this is what God is trying to call His people to, is Sabbath. So just like in the 7th day, day 7, it also points to the Sabbath. And in the 7th day, God didn't need to rest. He's God. He's all powerful. He did not need to rest. What He was trying to do is He wanted to show His people how to rest. And all of Genesis 1 points to the Sabbath. So why is the Sabbath so important? That's what I have. This is going to be the last thing that I'm going to be talking about. Why is the Sabbath so important to Easterners? Why is it so important to the Jewish nation, to the Israelites at that time? Why is it so important? When you think about it, it's the first people the people that were hearing the story for the first time, which was Genesis 1, is the Israelites at the foot of Mount Sinai. And they had just come out of Egypt from slavery. For centuries, they were enslaved by the Egyptians. They had made bricks for them every day, all day long, building their temples and cities. To the Egyptians, an Israelite's worth and value was in brick making. It was So, to the Egyptians, an Israelite's worth and value was in brick making. It was to show how many bricks that they could make. If they couldn't make any, they weren't very valuable. If they weren't valuable, they couldn't provide for their family. If they couldn't provide for their family, what would the Egyptians do to them and their wives and their children? So the very first lesson God wants them to learn is how to rest. Their value and worth was always tied up in working every day from sun up to sundown. God wants them to rest, to remind them that their value and their worth is no longer tied up in production. Your value and worth does not come from how much or what you can produce, but it comes because of who you are. Remember how we said that the creation of man has stuck out like a sore thumb. After God had created man, He called His creation very good. The creation of man is supposed to stand out and tell people who are reading it or hearing it for the first time, you are the crowning moment of God's good creation, and how he feels about you, and that he loves you and he values you and that he calls you good. This is what God wanted to show his people. And this was very, very important. And you will see it referenced over and over and over and over throughout the whole, I'd say throughout the whole Torah. You'll see it referenced over and over, is because God wanted this point to be made, and which is so important to the Hebrew people. Um, so yeah, this is all that I have so far. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. But yeah, you will see this has been extremely interesting on how Marty Solomon, he looks at it all. The way that he kind of mentions chiasms, he says that they're mentioned throughout the whole Bible, even throughout the whole Bible, not even just the Torah. It's throughout books upon books upon books. And chiasms, the patterns of structures, will be mentioned all throughout Genesis, all throughout all these books, and you will even see chiasms of chiasms, and they build upon each other. And the way that they build upon each other, there is no way that anybody would have been able to figure this out on their own, or even come up with it on their own. And this is another way on that, I think that is truly inspired by God. So along with the creation account, which I think gets it right perfectly, there's also the patterns that come out that I think is God inspired, and which you will find throughout the whole thing. And I've been purchasing some of these books. Like one of them is the one that I'll go through next, which is Genesis, which is written by Rabbi David Foreman. So he's the one that I've been getting some of this material from, and he has chiasms listed in there, like through Abraham, and which is so interesting, the way that they pull things apart and look at it, the way that the Jewish culture looks at the Bible and pulls things apart is completely different than how we read it. And that's been, very, very eye-opening for me. And the way that they explain it, is so amazing. So yeah, if other than that, I'm pretty much done with my whole presentation here. And if you guys have any other questions, we're pretty much done with this meeting.
I wanted to add something. I just, how the word of God's God inspired is just, I know Moses mentioned in our Bible study how the Old Testament is concealed and the New Testament is, reveals, and how just the whole Bible in itself is a beautiful chiasm, and how, and we all know that the Bible was written by different authors. So how it's just beautiful how God works, where everything he did was inspired by him, and it couldn't have been all these authors working together, that never met each other,
Right.
or like just written throughout years in between, but how it's still itself is just beautifully written, and how God works, and very meticulously, very detail oriented, and yeah, the chiasm thing is just beautiful.
I completely agree. It's something, when I first heard it, floored me. And then when I looked it up for myself, I was like, no way, does this really have to be true? And I can even find like one really quick. The way that I know that there's like chiasms about like Abraham and Noah, even with Noah, it's huge. The way that they explain it, what, I might not even be able to find it.
One that I learned in seminary school is the Book of Judges, how each judge is getting like worse and worse and worse. And then the middle judge is the worst one, but then it comes back around when Samson's the last one, and he's the least worst out of all of them. So how that is like a little chiasm in itself with the Book of Judges. And I
Right.
thought that's the one I learned, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. I have to look a lot more into it. He would be an example in the book that I have. See if you can see it. But this would be just the chiasm, just with Abraham. The one that would be with Noah would fill up a whole page of a chiasm that they have. I'm sorry, excuse me. But yeah, it's just so interesting. It's so interesting that the way that they look at everything. I'm sorry, excuse me. But yeah, it's so interesting. It's something that I want to keep studying. I want to look more into. I want to get more books on. But the way that the Jewish culture looks at it, it's so much different, and you know, it makes sense. It makes sense that the way that they read it, because these are the people, you know, I've talked about it in my second lesson that I put on, you know, talking about the reliability of the Bible and how much dedication, how much care that all these Jews gave to the Bible, how much they did at first. You know, at first they couldn't write anything, so they memorized it. This was a culture of memorization. After they memorized it and they wrote it all down, it was strictly written down with with so many it was just really, really strictly written down. The way that they took so much care with scriptures. It makes sense to read it in the context of Jewish culture and the way that they see it, and not just the way that we see it. And that's one thing that I will look at for the next meeting. And with you guys, I'll give you I guess like kind of a preview of what we will be talking about. Are going to be two of the really I would think kind of the hardest questions that I had at the beginning of my journey, and which was, you know, the sacrificing of Abraham with his son Isaac. You know, I know he didn't really sacrifice him, but you know, God still asked for it. Was it really necessary? Does God um, ask or demand sacrifices? So that's one of the really hard questions. I even think that a lot of people in church even have. I'm going to be going over two questions. That's going to be one of them. Second question is going to be, why was Moses not led into the promised land? So one of the hardest verses that I've read. Um, I searched a lot for it, and the way that I had Rabbi David Foreman explain it was absolutely beautiful, the way that he explained it. So I will be grabbing both of them from Rabbi David Foreman for the next two questions. So because I kind of already know where our next meeting is going to go, I probably won't wait as long, like a month. I'll probably do it in somewhere in the middle of the month of the next month. So probably in about 3 weeks will be the next one. But yeah, if you guys want to ask any other questions, mention anything else, I mean, I want to thank you guys all for coming, and you guys are free to log off if you want. Yeah, if you guys want to talk about anything else or have any other questions, I'm all ears.
I really thought it was interesting how you covered the whole evening and day thing for the creation, because when I was reading it, I also noticed that, but I didn't know why it was mentioned, which I was like, okay, obviously when something's mentioned in the Bible and it's mentioned repeatedly like that, there has to be a purpose for it. It's not just random. So yeah, I'm glad that you covered that, because it's very interesting. And then when someone was asking about like the concept of time, like I feel like this is just an opinion of mine. I feel like sometimes God uses things that make sense to us in our everyday life, that because if he were to explain what was really going on, it would be mind-boggling. We wouldn't understand it. Our mind couldn't wrap its mind around it. So like we understand the concept of a day,
Right.
but we don't understand what really went on. We probably wouldn't be able to understand it, you know, because it's just so, it would just be so crazy.
Right. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. Like, we can only explain so much. I know what you mean. We can only explain so much, and it's hard to explain. Even if scientists were to say, like, so if you attribute God to everything, then what did he do before the singularity? I have no idea what he did. I'm not God. I have no idea how he did it. He just did it. He's God. But I guess to some people that would kind of be a cop out, and that would be kind of like saying, that's a God of the gaps argument. But we're trying to explain God, since the beginning of time. I mean, they don't even have an explanation for what happened. All it is just speculation and theories. Their theories are just as good as ours. I don't think any of us know exactly, what happened even before that. But I think that with science along with the Bible, it can work together. This is the way that it can work cohesively. It can work together. Um, but I think it's a really good example about that. And yeah, that was a really really good observation, Naomi. Um, as for the seventh day, yeah, that was something I didn't notice at first, and it wasn't until I had to reread it again, and I was like, that's right. It doesn't say anything about evening and morning after the seventh day. So if you take a look at it, if say like I guess you can even use it both ways. Say that at the end of mankind, when after God had created after God had created man and ended with the sixth day, that was, I don't know, scientists, some say is 100,000 years ago. It could be a lot less than that. It could be 70, 50,000 years ago. Say it's somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years ago. Since then, between then and now, we would still be in the seventh day. That would be all that time. So it's still not a literal day, which is a 24-hour period or 1,000 years, like the Bible says. You can even use that even with how a lot of people say 6,000 years. The way that I thought about it, I was like, you know what? That still doesn't even make sense. 6,000 years, because when you look at it, say that they attribute 6,000 years to how long would it be? Like since Adam and Eve had been since now. I don't even know how long that is. How long that they would say that was 6,000 years. I think it would say 6,000 years for creation. And then after that would be, I guess, the biblical timeline that they usually have, which is like what? You have 2,000 years since Jesus and then another 2,000 years since then. I would say maybe about like 4,000 or 5,000 years, they would say, since the creation of Adam or something like that. So, even with that, we would kind of still be in the seventh day. So you still have a problem with the way that the days were created. So it still doesn't make sense. So that's kind of the way that I kind of looked at it. And I think it's pretty evident with the way that scientists explain, how the universe on Earth was created. Yeah. Did anybody have anything else? Oh, I think you're on mute, Carrie. I don't know if you're trying. I saw your mouth moving, and I was like, I don't know if she's trying to say
I was
something.
like, this conversation just brings up more questions, but I ain't gonna ask them. We'll be here for another hour.
Bring him up. Bring him up. I like it.
Yeah, because my mind keeps wandering. You talk about like, I'm thinking like interpreting it like just like a lay person. Could it be that the Bible maybe is just a book of poetry? Like it's just one big poem, and we're supposed to extrapolate what we're supposed to learn from it out of what we're able to understand of it. So basically, studying the Bible is very important for any Christian, because without the study of the Bible, we're not able to learn what we're supposed to learn, because there are things that, as you evolve as a person, are able to understand at a different level. So rereading the Bible is important. Studying the Bible is important, because through that, you're able to learn the lessons within the poem and how everything kind of connects. That's what I was wondering.
Right, right. And that's kind of almost the exact same way that Marty Solomon, he would explain it, the one that does a podcast. So Marty Solomon, he says the exact same thing, you shouldn't even bring science up to you and begin with. He goes, it has the beginning of Genesis has nothing to do with science and has everything to do with poetry. So that's the way that he explains it with chiasm. So he says even the whole book of Genesis, I guess even the whole Torah would just be a book of poetry. But I guess to be specific, he says the whole first chapter, Genesis 1, is a big poem of God's creation. So that's the way that he explains it. So that's his explanation, and that's why the chiasms are so, I guess, obvious. I guess to them it's obvious. To me, it wasn't. I guess not until I studied it, it wasn't obvious. But that's the way that he would explain it. But I like to hold both views. I'm a simple man. I am very dry cut, black and white, and so I have to see it like. I think that's what he talks about a lot in his podcast, is that a lot of Westerners, I guess, are like myself, where we're just like straightforward, cut and dry, black and white. And unfortunately, that's the way that I look at a lot of things. That's kind of where my mind goes. But this has just been opening a whole lot of doors the way that he explains it. It's been really broadening my whole scope of how the Bible should be looked at and read.
Yeah. And then my other observation is, I think you mentioned that there's theory that we're still in the seventh day.
Mm-hmm.
So the seventh day, God rested.
Yes.
So should we expect an eighth day? What's going to happen in day 8? Is there going to be a day 8 that we just don't know about?
Yeah.
So that's
actually, that book,
thinking type of mentality that's out there is like, maybe there's more to it,
right?
Than just, if we're in the seventh day, then there could be more to it that we're not expected to understand.
Yeah.
So that's how the Bible ends it, but there will be more to it.
Right. And that's what Dr. Hugh Ross mentions in his book, The Creator and the Cosmos. He does mention that we should be expecting the eighth day. I forget where he grabs his scripture from, and I want to say it's Revelation, but I am not completely 100% sure. But he says that there is a mention of an eighth day, or where it should mention the eighth day, because the eighth day is going to be God's new creation. So God's new creation will be the eighth day, and that will be the final day. So that's what his explanation is, why we're still in the seventh day. So Marty Solomon's explanation is completely different than that, of course, of why we're still in the seventh day. I think the way that Marty Solomon explains it is that we are still in the seventh day because I guess God wanted that poem to be open-ended. He wanted it to be open-ended because God wanted it as an invitation for anybody to come to him and find rest through him. So that's how he would explain it. But Dr. Hugh Ross explains it, it is mentioned in the Bible. Here's some scriptures to support it, which I got to look a little bit more into. But he says that the eighth day would be the final day of creation, which would be, I guess, God's perfect creation. Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You know what, Andrew? I love it though. Like, I love how we're talking about how it's a poem, but I love how science itself is just, supporting this poem. Exactly. So it's amazing how, this is the theory and the evidence is behind it, And I also love how he just leaves a lot of things to the mind. It's like a sense of wonder that he leaves. And if things are explained, if everything's explained, honestly, the wonder vanishes. We kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. So I think it's very intentional, like all these pieces that are missing, because the more, then we search more and we learn more, like you guys were saying. So
Yeah.
it's very intentional, and I love it. Thank you so much for today.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it, and I completely agree with you, Naomi. And this is why I think that I would criticize a lot of atheists on the way that they read it. When they read it, they read it just I guess the way that I did the first time, which is just really cut and dry, straightforward. Don't really understand everything, but instead of, like me, how I just went into it and started researching more, they kind of just said, you know what, it's stupid, forget it, I'm done with it. But the more it seems like, the more and more I keep researching, I feel like I kind of dug myself into a hole, and the hole just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and like there's no end to it. But I'm loving every single minute of it, because I'm just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. I thought I was obsessed at first, but after listening to like this podcast and studying it and opening my mind to even more stuff and reading books, I never thought I'd read a book by a rabbi. But like after like reading his stuff, I was like, it's like it's just it's blows my mind completely. you know I don't know if anybody has anything else to share.
I like how you emphasize and say that the Bible was written um, specifically for Hebrews or
Mhm.
Jewish nation. That changes our way of looking at verses and scripture. And
Mhm.
that's very important
Yeah.
to, because sometimes we just read the Bible and we say, oh, okay, it was inspired it is inspired by God, but we fail to understand that the Bible was specifically written for the Jewish nation.
Yeah.
And so understanding how they teach it and how they explain it, then, it helps us to understand as well.
Mhm.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
And thank you for
and
sharing
i
what
and
you
I know that, or for those of you that don't know, this is my mom. And she's also been listening to Marty's podcast too, and we've been going back and forth through text messages like, oh my God, did you listen to this, did you listen to that, oh man, just look more into this. And it's just like, oh man, like our minds are just like blown. Yeah. But yeah, it's really, really good stuff, great stuff. Yeah.
I think that, well, I've shared that with you, Andrew, that listening to these teachings has, oh my gosh, has really, just like you say, it's just mind blowing. It's opened up my eyes, because we've been raised in church. We've heard the story
Mhm.
of the creation, how many times.
Yeah.
And I like what Marty says, how it becomes like a lullaby effect. We have a lullaby effect
Yeah.
because there are certain things in the Bible that we read them over and over and we just take it for granted. Oh, okay, well, the
Right.
serpent spoke to Eve, and which that's really weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, that it's really opened my eyes and my understanding.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, and every day I want to learn more. I want to hear more. I want to see it.
Right, right. And the way that he mentions in his podcast is, to ask really relevant questions, or just any questions in general, because those questions that you have are very important. So he'll go through every single, book or scriptures and things like that, and ask, all right, well, what's wrong with it? What seems odd about it? Because whatever's odd about those scriptures, or you think that's out of place, is kind of a way to say, hey, there's something to it. There's something more important and something that should be discovered about it. That's why it's kind of obvious that it's there. I guess to most people, it's like, oh, it's dumb. That's weird. Christians are just like a crazy kooky type. Why do they have this crazy stuff in it? That's because it should be obvious. And it's a really interesting way of looking at it. But yeah, like you like how you said with the snake talking, is something that I also feel like I was like one of those people who are like, yeah, I've always thought the snake was weird, but if I ask a question, I'm gonna feel dumb. I guess you being raised Christian, you feel like asking some of these questions in a room full of Christians, you'll get criticized about it or think like, oh man, everybody's gonna, even though to the rest of the world it's like, yeah, it should be dumb. It should be obvious that it's dumb. But I guess it's different raised in a Christian in the Christian world.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your lessons, and
No problem. No problem.
I share them once you get the recordings out. So
Yeah, I'll like I always do. I'll put them out. So I'll have it up on YouTube. And I look forward to the next one. The next one's the way that that they explained it. For those next questions are super interesting. So I look forward to the next one. And yeah, hope that you all can make it.